Hello, this is Cassie, and today I'm going to be talking to you about differentiated instruction. So, differentiated instruction is something that is becoming more and more popular as more and more teachers are using this teaching strategy in their classrooms and seeing that their students are having great success in this way. And differentiated instruction is something that I've been focusing on the last couple of years of my teaching. And I have seen just the change that happened in my classroom when I stopped doing so much direct teach and started setting up situations for my students to learn at their own pace. So, after my years of trial and error and trying new things and being really reflective about what worked and what didn't work, I came up with a system that I called a learning path. So, today I'm going to talk to you about differentiated instruction, but specifically using learning paths. So, what is a learning path? Well, a learning path is just a tool that you can use to implement differentiated instruction in your own classroom. So, it is a set of learning activities that are based on your set of standards. Also, a learning path is aligned to your school's scope and sequence, but loosely because it has to have some sort of flexibility so that you can move at the pace of your students. Your goal is to have every student master every standard, but we know that some students learn fast and some students learn slower. Some students come to you without the background knowledge that they need to be successful. Maybe they're 2 or 3 years behind when you get them. So differentiated instruction and using a learning path recognizes that not all of your students are starting at the same place and they're not all ending at the same place. But your goal is to have every student master every standard. Finally, a learning path is something that is student owned and teacher facilitated. And we'll talk a lot more about that in just a few minutes. So that is what a learning path is. So what is a learning path not? Well, many teachers get a little scared when they hear talk of differentiated instruction. And they feel overwhelmed because they think, how in the world am I going to create the exact lesson that my student needs, right for their own interests and right for their own learning preferences, and having 20 different lessons a day? Well, that is overwhelming and that is impossible. Personalized lessons are not differentiated instruction. Differentiated instruction is more about having opportunities for students to work at the lesson when they're ready for the lesson. A learning path is also not an old-fashioned sit and get. So when you teach this way, you're going to be cutting back your whole group lessons all the way. So the goal would be to really not do whole group lessons. I went an entire semester without doing a single whole group lesson. But if that's not where you are, try and start by limiting your lecture to 5 minutes, a true mini lesson. So in that time, you just tell the students what you're learning, why it's going to be important to their future, and then you do 1 or 2 practice problems, and that's it. When we do these whole group lessons in the kind of old-fashioned traditional way, we aren't meeting the needs of all of our students. We really just teach to the lowest students when you really think about it. You present the information and then you give example after example after example, and you really explain the best way you can so that the lowest students in the group understand and learn. Unfortunately, a lot of the times those students still didn't learn it. And meanwhile, your average kids and your high kids are bored, or they could have been using that time to learn new and more challenging things. So a learning path is also not just cover it and move on. And I know there is a lot of pressure from schools in order to teach, especially when you have a scope and sequence that your school is very reliant on. And you may feel like you have a benchmark coming up, so you really need to get going and cover this material. But differentiated instruction never covers the material and moves on. It's also not thinking that every standard is as important as every other standard. And so in my time really researching and learning and trying new things, I discovered that there are some standards that are more important than the others. And that's because those are the standards that help the students in their real life or in the years that are coming and what they're going to be learning next. So, earlier I said that one thing that the learning path was student owned but teacher facilitated. So, now we're going to talk a little bit about what that means. So, differentiated instruction is student owned. So, first off, students walk the path at their own pace. And that is exactly why we don't cover and move on. We want the students to walk at their own pace. We want them to set goals for themselves. They know where they were, they know where they are right now, and they know where they're going. Enrichment activities are available for students along the way, and then it's the essential standards that are the focus for struggling students. Maybe your students that are coming in 2 years behind. We know what is most important for them to focus on. Activities can be excused. So this is something that is kind of freeing for teachers as they begin teaching in this way. The teacher has discretion on what assignments can be excused and for what reason they can be excused. So skills are assessed and grades are given after mastery has occurred. And so when it's time for grades, you don't really have to worry about all of the activities that have happened along the way. What a student is going to be assessed on is what they can actually do after they've learned it and after they've shown mastery. And this may be that the student themselves feels like they've mastered the concepts, or this might be that the student has mastered the concepts. A learning path is also student owned in the sense that students are supported right when they need it. So there is formative assessment that occurs all along the way. All of that time that you used to spend doing whole group instruction is now going to be spent walking from student to student, looking at what they're doing, looking at their tracking sheets, kind of seeing where they are on the learning path. When you see something that needs support, interventions happen right then and there. So these interventions can look differently. Maybe it's just helping a student solve a problem right on their desk with a worksheet they're working on. It may be a student that just doesn't have the background knowledge from earlier grade levels they just didn't get. So it may be calling them into a small group and working with them to alleviate any gaps that they may have that are keeping them from moving forward in their learning path. Students receive the level of support they need to be successful. Earlier when we were talking about whole group instruction and how we really teach to the lowest students when we do that, one thing that it made me think about is students should receive the level of support they need. Our high performing and our gifted students, they don't need as much support. But when we group them in with the other students, we are spoon feeding them knowledge. And when we do that, we are denying them the opportunity to go find that for themselves, the chance to really work on the skill of learning. So we want to be careful that we are always giving students the level of support they need so that they can all be successful. Also, using a learning path is great for students because they pick up these wonderful life skills all along the way. So some of my favorite things that I've seen happen in my students is first off, they learn how to learn. And that is such an important skill. All through their entire lives, they're going to want to do something or have problems that they need solved. And they can learn now how to solve those problems by seeking out answers through the internet or through YouTube or whatever ways they can. So one of the best skills is they learn how to learn, a lifelong skill. They also learn how to work with each other. They learn how to set goals and meet those goals. They grow their mindset to understand that they can do these things. They become self-reflective. Overall, they feel successful. Some of your students may have never felt success in school. when you have a student that has come to you very behind, that has probably been a pattern for them over the course of their education. They learned material but never really felt like they learned it. They were tested on that material and they failed the test. Maybe they were retaught and retested and they were likely to fail that again. And in the end, the teacher moved on because she had to cover more material. Students like that have never felt successful. Maybe they've tried their hardest and their hardest wasn't good enough. When you use a learning path, you don't let the student move on until they have shown mastery. That produces successful feelings, and those feelings are what make students like school and like learning and become forever learners. So a learning path is student owned, but it's teacher facilitated. So let's talk about how the teacher facilitates this type of learning in the classroom. So first off, the teachers plan the logical steps along the learning path. So they look at the scope and sequence, and that provides the framework for planning all of the stops that the students will make as they're working through their learning path. If there isn't a scope and sequence, then the teacher can just decide the logical order that the standard should be presented, and they need to think about how many days it will take for the students to learn that standard. The teacher also must determine which standards are the most essential for student success in the future. Also, the teacher needs to think about where the standards are in the school year that offer the best extension activities for project-based learning experiences. So maybe when you're on your financial literacy standards, you could do something where students start a business. And you think about those extension activities that are going to be perfect for your fast finishers or your gifted students as they move along their learning path. So after everything is sort of planned and laid out and there's kind of a skeleton to what you're going to do, it's going to be the time to develop the process for students moving from one stop of the path to another. So first off, the teacher just takes the time and chooses activities. These activities will be a part of the path, but they're going to be activities that allow the student to understand the standard, practice it, ultimately to retain the knowledge of the skill or standard that they're working on. It's really important that whatever you choose for your activities, that they have a good balance of the amount of time students invest into the activity versus the amount of learning that has occurred from that time. So make sure you're thinking about best practices when you're choosing your activities so that students get a lot of bang for their buck as they're learning. It's also important when you're choosing which activities that you're going to be including in your learning path to make sure that you choose ones that offer lots of chances for the students to work together and collaborate and learn from each other. And also think about how you can maybe take an activity and make it digital so that kids are working with technology and learning how to create. Also think about their interests. What is popular for them right now, and try to pique their interest using the activities that you choose. And finally, just let it be fun. Throw in some learning games or some dice games that kids like to play, and they can also practice the skill with that. So once you've chosen kind of your activity, you're going to have to decide what mastery of that standard looks like. So you're going to have to create some kind of summative assessment or quiz or test that the students will take. And then how will mastery look when the students take that test or that quiz? It's also important for the kids to be able to decide for themselves if they feel they've mastered it, so that this mastery comes from the opinion of both the student and the teacher. So after kind of thinking about mastery and assessment, the teacher needs to think about, what will I do if students didn't master? What about the kids who didn't learn the standard or failed the test? So having already in mind what you're going to be doing when you meet with these small groups will help make sure that no kid is moving forward in the learning path before they're ready to do that. And finally, the teacher will replicate herself by creating or finding mini lessons. So I talked about how really with differentiated instruction, it's best to get rid of as much of whole group instruction as possible. To do this, though, you have to replicate yourself. You have to record yourself teaching those lessons. And that way, when students need to hear it again, or maybe they need to revisit it or they forgot, they can just go back to wherever you stored that in Google Classroom or in an email or on your website, and they can access it then. When you are able to replicate yourself, you are more able to meet with those students who need you the most. And many of your kids don't need you. They need you to facilitate their learning. They need you to give them the materials and the supplies and the websites and the videos that they can go to and learn from. But they don't need you to look at them face to face and distribute the information to them. When we help our students too much, we handicap them. So we want to be sure that we are giving the kids the right amount of support, and very, very often kids are able to learn with just a small lesson. So after your learning path is planned and you've chosen activities that are going to be a part of the stops along your learning path, it's then time to think about supporting students. So teachers are going to assess all along the way and know exactly where each student is along the learning path. So basically, the students will have a tracker. They keep track of their own mastery and where they are. And the teacher will have a tracker, a kind of a master tracker, where she can look at a glance and see where every student is. And these help the students and the teacher kind of move through the path through constant formative assessment. The teacher is going to assess for mastery before allowing students to move to the next stop along the learning path. And we talked about this a few minutes ago when we were talking about the quiz or summative assessment. And the teacher also needs to provide spiraled review for long-term retention. So we don't want to just have a student learn something and then never revisit it, because we don't want them to forget it either. And then teachers support students in ways that keep them moving towards the finish line. So one way a teacher supports their students is just by meeting with small groups of students daily. So you're going to have quite a bit of your time dedicated to your students that need you the most, but you'll also have time dedicated to students that need challenged or who need to grow or who you're working with for any special reason. Also, an important thing to do is manage the behaviors and routines that keep the students on track. So you have to have systems in place so that the students know what to do. They're going to be working very independently. And so they need to know, where do they get this activity when it's time to take it? Or where do they turn this in? Or where do they go to watch the tutorial video? All of that stuff is part of the routines that are in place. Behaviors, too, have to be managed in a very effective way, because when students are given a lot of independence, they can sometimes be not very responsible with their freedom. So it's important to really help students understand that, yes, they do have freedom, but with that freedom comes a lot more responsibility. So it is very important to really have good classroom management and routines to help stay on track. A great teacher using differentiated instruction always thinks about best practices and what she plans and does. And she encourages and motivates her students and has high expectations for all of them. From the lowest student to the highest student in the class, the teacher expects nothing but success and mastery from her students. So we've talked quite a bit today about learning paths and differentiated instruction, kind of just hit the main focuses of how you make that happen in your classroom. So coming soon, I'm going to be talking a little bit more in depth about each little component that we talked about today. So we're going to actually create a stop on a learning path. We're going to talk about setting up your classroom to be successful. We're going to talk about how to actually manage your students through routines and procedures. We're going to talk about how do you grade using this system. And then we're going to talk about how do students track their own success and how does the teacher track their success. And then finally, we're going to talk about how you can get started this year in your class. So I'm so excited. Stay tuned. Bookmark my site so you can come back when the next blog in the series is posted. I'm so excited to have the chance to share what I've been working on for these last couple of years. I have seen such tremendous success with my own students that I'm so excited to share this with other teachers and also to help them replicate my system in their own classroom so that they can see the benefits to differentiated instruction as well. Thank you for tuning in. I'd love to have you as a subscriber. So you can visit my website at cassinoack.com, CASSINOACK.com. Thank you and have a great rest of your day.